My name is Colleen Whitaker. I'm 52 years old, and for 22 years I restored the stained glass that let light into other people's churches. 3 days after I buried my husband Floyd, his son stood in his study and read me a will. The house, the lake villa, the company, all theirs. Mine was a $200,000 insurance check and a $180,000 hospital debt with my name attached. Bianca smiled and called me the housekeeper who got a marriage certificate. My lawyer said sue. I said I'd sign the waiver instead. They thought I'd broken. But the night before I signed, I went to take down the stained glass panel Floyd commissioned for that study, and behind the lead came, taped to the frame, was a small brass key. What that key opened would turn every million they were counting into a debt they could never crawl out of. The people from 22 years ago called me the second wife, though I never met the first one. Marlene died of an aneurysm in a grocery store parking lot in Fresno when Sydney was 6 and Edwin was 3. I married Floyd Whitaker when I was 30 and those boys were 9 and 6, and from the first Thanksgiving I understood the arithmetic of the house I was walking into. I was never going to be first. I decided I could live with being steady instead. I had my own life before Floyd. I restored stained glass, church windows mostly. The old lead came kind that cracks and slumps after 100 winters. In 1998, I had a standing contract with a diocese in Sacramento, 3 windows a year, good money, my name in a small line at the bottom of a dedication plaque nobody read but me. I gave that up the year Edwin broke his arm falling off the Whitakers' back fence and needed someone home for 6 weeks of follow-up appointments. Floyd never asked me to give it up. I did it because I looked at the schedule, and I looked at Edwin's cast, and I made a decision the way you make decisions when you love people, quietly, without putting it on a ledger. Floyd built Whitaker Glass and Construction out of a single flatbed truck and a business loan his own father had refused to co-sign. By the time I met him, he had 11 employees and calluses that never softened no matter how much money came in. He worked Saturdays. He missed Edwin's 8th grade graduation for a job in Modesto and drove 2 hours after to bring home a cake nobody wanted at 10 at night, and I remember standing in the kitchen watching him set it on the counter, like an apology he didn't know how to phrase out loud. "I know," he said, before I said anything. "I know, Colleen." "Eat something?" I told him. That was the whole conversation. That was most of our marriage, if I'm honest. Things understood and left unsaid because saying them felt like handing someone a bill. In 2019, Floyd came to me with a piece of paper, engineering vellum, and on it he'd sketched, badly, he was no artist, an arched window, maybe 4 feet by 6.
"For the study," he said.
"I want you to make it. Whatever you want. I'm not going to tell a glass woman what glass to cut." I designed it around a passage from Isaiah, though I never told him that outright. A burst of gold and cobalt radiating out from a center point, meant to catch the afternoon sun that came through the west-facing wall of his office around 4 o'clock. It took me 5 months. I cut 400 and some pieces of glass with my own hands at a work table in our garage, and Floyd would come out at night in his socks and stand behind me and just watch the flame go across the copper foil, not saying anything, and I understood that was Floyd's way of saying I love you. Standing in a cold garage at 11 p.m. watching a woman work. Sydney and Edwin grew up and became men I still didn't fully know. Sydney went into project management at his father's company, 34 years old now, handsome in the loose, unfinished way of a man who'd never had to build anything himself. Edwin went into finance, 31, quieter than his brother, the one who did the books. I loved them the way you love furniture you've lived with for 2 decades. Familiar, load-bearing. Occasionally something you barked your shin against in the dark. Floyd's heart started failing in March. Congestive, the doctors said. A word I learned to say without flinching by April. I was at Mercy General 11 hours some days, in a vinyl chair by his bed, doing crosswords so my hands would have something to do besides shake. Sydney came twice a week, for 20 minutes. Edwin came once, with Bianca, and I remember hearing the 2 of them in the hallway outside room 412, not troubling to lower their voices much. "If it's within the year, does the trust reset or not?" Edwin was saying. "Because if it resets in January, that changes the whole." "I'm just saying we should talk to Novak before, not after," Bianca said. "Timing matters." I sat with my crossword and didn't move. Floyd's monitor beeped its steady rhythm behind me. That was an open door, and grief has a way of teaching you which doors not to walk through, so I stayed in my chair. The last lucid night, June the 9th, Floyd took my hand. His grip had gotten light, like holding a bird. "Colleen," he said, and then nothing for a while, just breathing. Then, light always finds its way out. "Floyd." "You'll see," he said and closed his eyes, and I thought it was the medication talking morphine poetry, and I kissed his forehead and told him to rest. He died 4 days later, at 6:47 in the morning, with only me in the room. That night, unable to sleep, I went down to get my car from the hospital garage and heard Sydney's voice around the corner of the concrete stairwell, low, urgent, the particular pitch of a man who thinks no one is listening. "It's done," he was saying into his phone. "Now we get the paperwork moving before she has a chance to think." The oak door of Floyd's study clicked shut behind me, and Sydney was already sitting in his father's leather chair. Not beside the desk. Behind it. "Sit down, Colleen," he said, like he was granting me a favor. A man in a gray suit stood near the bookshelf, a leather folder tucked under his arm. He hadn't been introduced yet. Edwin sat in one of the 2 client chairs across from the desk, leaving the second one for me. Bianca stood behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder, her rings catching the lamplight.
Iset.
The chair was cold through my dress. "This is Mr. Halloran," Edwin said. "Dad's estate attorney." "I thought Marguerite handled the estate." "Marguerite handled some things," Sydney said. "Dad had Mr. Halloran draft the will 3 years ago." 3 years ago. I filed that away and said nothing. Halloran cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Mrs. Whitaker, I know this is difficult. I'll read the relevant provisions, and then we can discuss." He read fast, the way people read things they don't want you to stop and question. "The house on Delford Lane. The lake property in Hartwell. Whitaker Glass and Construction. All shares, all voting rights. To Sydney Whitaker and Edwin Whitaker in equal parts." Then, almost as an afterthought, "To my wife, Colleen Whitaker, the sum of $200,000 from my life insurance policy in recognition of her companionship." Companionship. 22 years reduced to one word, read off a page in a stranger's flat voice. "There's also this," Halloran said, and his voice changed register slightly, the way a doctor's does before bad news. "The outstanding medical debt from Mr. Whitaker's final hospitalization, $180,000 for $112, is assigned to Mrs. Whitaker as the surviving spouse, per the hospital's billing agreement." I heard the numbers land somewhere behind my ribs. I did not move. I had spent months in a vinyl chair beside that hospital bed, and now I was being handed the bill for having been there. "That can't be right," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "It's standard," Halloran said. "Spousal liability for medical debt is codified under state law when—" "I mean the house. The company. Floyd built that company with me standing next to him at the bank when we couldn't make payroll in 2009. Sydney leaned back. "You weren't on the paperwork, Colleen. You were his wife. That's different from being his partner." Bianca made a small sound, almost a laugh, and looked at her nails. "It's not like she was ever really running anything. She restored church windows. It's a hobby, sweetie, not a business." "I gave up 2 commissions the year Floyd's mother was dying," I said, "to help nurse her. I gave up a cathedral contract in Denver the year Sydney broke his leg skiing and needed someone home." "Nobody asked you to," Bianca said. Her tone was light, almost pleasant, which made it worse. "You did that. That was your choice. Honestly, Colleen, you were the help. The help just happened to have a marriage license." The room went very quiet. Edwin looked at the floor. Sydney didn't correct her. I looked down at the will instead of at Bianca, because I did not trust my face just then. And that was when I saw it, Floyd's signature at the bottom of the last page. I know that signature. I watched that man sign birthday cards and mortgage papers and Christmas checks to the Church Restoration Fund for 22 years. This one leaned the wrong way, the F narrower than it should be, the tail under the W trembling in a small, jagged line his steady hand never made. "Could I get a copy of this?" I asked. Halloran glanced at Sydney before he answered. I can let you look it over now. Copies will go out once everything's filed with the court. I'd like one today. That's not how it works, Mrs. Whitaker. He closed the folder gently, like he was closing a subject rather than a document. You'll receive everything through proper channels. Professionals. I nodded because there was nothing else to do with my hands, my face, the $200,000 and the $180,412 sitting in my lap like stones. We'd like this settled quickly, Sydney said. There's a release form, waiving any claim beyond what's specified. We're hoping you can sign by end of week. I'll think about it, I said, and stood and thanked Mr. Halloran for his time, because my mother raised me to be polite even while bleeding. I let myself out through the hallway instead of the front door, past the coat closet where Floyd used to hang my scarf every winter without being asked. My hand was still on the closet door when I heard Edwin's voice, low, just around the corner, talking to Bianca. As long as she signs before Friday, he was saying, no one can check anything. I stood very still, my fingers pressed flat against the wood, and I did not make a sound. I sat in my car in the driveway a full minute before I turned the key. Then I drove to Marguerite's office instead of home. Marguerite Doyle's office sat above a bakery on Chestnut, the smell of cinnamon rolls climbing the stairwell with me. She'd known Floyd since 1998, back when he was still pouring concrete himself. She opened the door before I knocked, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, a legal pad already covered in her cramped handwriting.
Sit, she said.
Tell me everything. Don't skip the ugly parts. I told her, the reading in the study, 3 days after we buried Floyd. Halloran's flat recitation. $200,000 for me, $180,412 in hospital debt stacked on top of it like a second casket. Bianca's voice, light as a knife. The signature that didn't look like Floyd's hand at all. Too careful, too even, like someone tracing rather than writing. Marguerite's pen stopped moving. Say that part again. About the signature. It shook a little at the end of every stroke. Floyd's hand never shook. Not even in the hospital, not until the last week. She set the pen down, and for a moment, she didn't look like a lawyer at all. She looked like a woman about to put her fist through a wall. Colleen, a will drafted 3 years ago, using a lawyer neither of us has ever heard of, that hands 2 grown stepsons a construction company and a lake house while cutting his wife of 22 years down to bus fare and a hospital bill. That doesn't smell wrong. It smells like something died in the walls. I know. Then let's file a challenge. Tomorrow. I'll have a motion drafted by Thursday. We contest probate. We subpoena Halloran's file. We get a handwriting expert on that signature before those 2 so much as touch a doorknob in that house. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at them instead of her. I'm going to sign the waiver. The silence that followed had a texture to it, like the air before a window breaks. You're going to what? Sign it. Before Friday, like they want. Marguerite stood up, so fast her chair rolled back and hit the bookshelf. Have you lost your mind?
Colleen.
Look at me. You are not some woman who folds. I watched you argue a contractor down $11,000 over a chapel window in front of a bishop. You do not fold. I'm not folding. I made myself say it evenly, the way I'd say it to a customer who wanted the wrong shade of blue for a saint's robe.
I'm disappearing.
There's a difference. She sat back down slowly, watching me now the way she might watch a kiln reading, waiting to see if the number climbing was safe or about to crack the glass. Explain it to me, slowly. If I fight, they get lawyers. They get depositions, discovery, 6 months of delay, and 6 months is exactly what Sydney and Edwin need to move whatever needs moving. I heard Edwin in the hallway today. He told Bianca that as long as I sign before Friday, no one checks anything. That's not a man protecting an inheritance. That's a man on a clock. Marguerite went very still. So, I give them exactly what they're rushing toward, I said. I let them believe the widow gave up without a fight. And while they're busy congratulating themselves, somebody who isn't grieving and isn't distracted goes and finds out what they're really so afraid of me checking. For the first time since I'd walked in, something in her face eased into something like respect. You want me to dig quietly instead of suing loudly. I want you to pull whatever paper exists on that company and those two properties. Financing, liens, anything filed at the county. Quietly, while I play the widow who's already lost. She was already turning to her filing cabinet, muttering something about a friend at the title company who owed her a favor. I don't love this plan, she said. I want that on record. I think you're walking a wire without a net. I've been walking without a net for 22 years, Marguerite. I'm just finally choosing where I fall. She almost smiled at that. Almost. We agreed she'd start first thing in the morning, and that I would say nothing to anyone, not Rosa, not Sydney, not Edwin, until she had something solid in her hands. I left her office a little after 4. The cinnamon smell gone stale by then, replaced by exhaust and the first cold edge of evening. I went home, made dinner I didn't eat, and sat by the phone without admitting to myself that I was waiting for it to ring. It rang a little after 9. Marguerite's name lit up the screen, and something in the second ring made me pick it up before it went to voicemail. Colleen. Her voice had changed completely, tight, fast, stripped of the calm courtroom cadence she always kept. I pulled the county filings on Delford Lane and the Hartwell house both. Sit down if you're not already sitting. I'm sitting. Papers shifted on her end, and when she spoke again her voice had dropped almost to a whisper, like she didn't trust the number in front of her. There are 2 mortgages on those properties that weren't there 18 months ago. Both filed within the last year. Both for amounts that don't make sense against what those houses are worth. I set my cold tea down on the counter and said nothing because I could hear she wasn't finished. Colleen, she said, according to this paperwork, those 2 houses aren't worth 1 cent. Floyd. What did he do with the money? I called Marguerite back within the hour, said I needed to think, and hung up before she could argue. The next morning I drove to Delford Lane alone, telling myself I only wanted the glass before the lawyers finished sorting the house. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The house smelled like nobody lived there anymore, though it had only been 11 days. Sydney's boxes were stacked in the front hall, taped and labeled in Bianca's handwriting. I let myself into Floyd's study with my own key, the one nobody had thought to ask me back for, and I stood in front of the window a long moment before I touched anything. The panel was mine, every inch of it, a river of amber and blue glass running through a leaded frame, herons rising out of cattails toward a sun I'd cut from 31 separate pieces. Floyd used to sit at his desk in the evenings and watch the light move across it as the day went down. He'd never once told me what it cost him. I'd never once asked. I laid a moving blanket on the desk and got out my tools, the same lead knife and horseshoe nails I'd used for 30 years of church commissions. My hands knew this work better than my mind did most days. I worked the putty knife along the frame's edge, patient, the way you have to be, or the lead splits and you lose a season's labor in 1 careless second. 3 sides came free clean. The 4th stuck. I pressed harder along the bottom rail, where the lead channel ran thick, and felt something under my thumb that wasn't glass and wasn't solder. A small hard ridge, taped flat against the cane, painted over to match. I turned my flashlight on it, and my chest went very still.
A key.
Brass, small, the kind that opens a safe deposit box, not a house. Someone, Floyd, it had to be Floyd, no one else touched this glass, had taped it flush to the underside of the frame and painted the tape the same dull gray as the lead. Folded beneath it, so thin I nearly missed it, was a strip of paper gone soft from months in the dark. I peeled it loose with the tip of my knife. Floyd's handwriting, the same slant he used on grocery lists and birthday cards. A string of numbers, 4, then 2, then 5. Underneath, 1 line. The light always finds its way out. I sat down in his desk chair, because my legs asked me to. He'd said those exact words to me in the hospital, his hand dry and light in mine, and I'd thought it was morphine talking, a dying man reaching for something poetic. It wasn't morphine. It was an instruction. I just hadn't had the key yet to read it as one.
Mom.
I hadn't heard the door. Rosa stood in the frame with a dust rag still in her hand, and for 1 bad second I thought about closing my fist around the key, so she wouldn't see it. Then I stopped myself. Rosa had polished this desk every week for 11 years. If anyone in this house had earned the right to see what I was holding, it was her. She didn't ask what it was. She looked at the key, then at the panel half out of its frame, then at me, and something in her face settled, like a question she'd been carrying got answered without her having to voice it. "He knew you'd take that glass," she said. "Told me once. When she comes for the window, let her have the whole afternoon. Don't hurry her." Rosa's voice stayed low, even though the house was empty. I didn't understand it then. I thought he meant so you wouldn't cry in front of the movers. "When did he tell you that?" "February. 4 months before he died." She crossed the room and set her dust rag down on the desk, deliberate, like she was giving her hands something to do besides shake. "I've worked for this family since Edwin was in high school, Mrs. Whitaker. I know what those two are capable of, and I never said a word because it wasn't my house to speak in." She looked at the key again. "But I think Mr. Whitaker built you a door out of it. I'm not going to be the one who locks it back up." I asked her whether she knew what the key opened. She shook her head, not exactly. But her hand went to her apron pocket, and I watched her hesitate there, like she was deciding something all over again, even though the deciding had been done months ago. "He gave me an envelope back in January," she said. 6 months ago now. Told me to keep it safe and not to breathe a word of it. Not to you. Not to anyone." She drew it out at last, cream-colored, soft at the corners the way paper gets when it's carried and not just stored, my name across the front in Floyd's careful hand. She stepped close and pressed it into my palm, her fingers cold, her eyes wet. "He said only give it to her," Rosa whispered, "if she finds the key herself first." I opened the envelope right there in Rosa's kitchen, hands steady in a way that surprised me. Inside was a single sheet, notarized, dated the previous January. A limited power of attorney, granting me sole authority to access safe deposit box 47 at Coastal Trust Bank on Route 9, a branch I'd never once set foot in, 11 miles past the edge of town, the kind of place you'd only find if you already knew to look for it. "He opened that account without me," I said, not really to Rosa. 22 years, and he opened an account without me. "He opened it for you," Rosa said. "Different thing." I called Marguerite from the truck before I'd even started the engine. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Don't go without me. Give me 40 minutes. Coastal Trust Bank was a squat brick building between a tire shop and a shuttered diner, the kind of branch that still had a bell over the door. The woman at the desk, a tag that read Deborah pinned crooked on her cardigan, looked at the power of attorney for a long moment, then at my driver's license, then back at the paper. "Box 47, she said. "Haven't had anyone ask for that one in a while." She led us down a narrow hall lined with acoustic tile into a vault room that smelled like cold metal and pencil shavings. Marguerite's heels clicked twice against the concrete and stopped. Deborah fitted 2 keys into the lock plate, mine and the bank's, and slid the long steel box free. She set it on the table between us, said, "Take your time," and left us alone with it. I didn't touch it right away. "Colleen." Marguerite's voice was gentle, which from her was its own kind of warning. "Whatever's in there, it's going to change something. You should decide now if you want to know it alone or with me standing here. You're already standing here. Then I'm not going anywhere." I lifted the lid. On top lay a manila folder, thick enough that the metal clasp had bent trying to hold it shut. Beneath that, a second folder, thinner, with a bank's letterhead peeking out. And beneath both, wrapped in a rubber band gone brittle with age, a stack of documents bound in blue legal backing, the kind Marguerite's own office used. She reached past me and lifted the blue-bound stack first. Her thumb ran the edge like she was counting pages by feel. "This is a will," she said. "Notarized." She checked the date stamp, and her mouth went flat. 11 months ago. "Colleen, this is after the one Halloran read us." My chest did something strange. Not relief exactly, more like the floor, tilting back level after tilting the other way for 3 days straight. "Read it," I said. She read it standing up, glasses pushed to the end of her nose, and I watched her face instead of the page, because I didn't trust myself to look at Floyd's handwriting again yet. Somewhere in the second paragraph, her eyebrows came together. By the third page, she'd sat down without seeming to notice she was doing it. He revoked the Halloran will entirely, she said. Every asset, the house, the lake property, his interest in the company, goes into a trust. And you, Colleen, you're named sole trustee. Full discretion. Full control. She looked up. This isn't $200,000 and a debt. This is everything, and it's yours to decide what happens to it. I sat down across from her, because my legs had an opinion about that news and I hadn't asked them for one. There was more in the box. A bank statement, folded into thirds, showing an account I didn't recognize, a balance with more zeros than I let myself finish counting the first time through. A second small key, brass like the first but heavier, no label. And the thick manila folder, still unopened, with a name printed on the tab in block letters, Prentice Investigations. Marguerite set the will down and picked up the folder instead. She opened it the way you'd open something that might bite. The top sheet was a summary page, dense with dates and dollar figures, a header that read Case 4471, Whitaker. I leaned in to read it upside down and only made it through the first 2 lines before Marguerite's hand went still on the paper.
She didn't gasp.
She wasn't the type, but the color left her face the way water leaves a sink, all at once, down through some drain I couldn't see. Colleen, she said, and her voice had dropped into a register I'd never heard from her before, careful and low, like she was choosing each word with tweezers. Floyd didn't just know they were greedy. She turned the folder toward me, one finger still pressed to the page like she needed the anchor. He knew they'd committed a crime. I turned the page myself. The next sheet was a photocopy of a promissory note, dated 14 months back, for $11,000. The signature line read Floyd R. Whitaker, but the F leaned wrong. My Floyd's F always leaned right, like it was reaching for something. This one leaned back, careful, like a boy copying handwriting off a worksheet.
That's not his hand, I said.
Marguerite slid her glasses down her nose and looked at it properly.
No, it isn't.
She flipped to the summary page stapled behind it and read aloud in the flat voice lawyers use when the words underneath are anything but flat. Client observed subject Sydney Whitaker at Redline Card Room, Route 9, on 4 separate dates between March and June. Subject settled a $22,000 marker using funds traced to a personal loan bearing a signature inconsistent with known exemplars of Floyd R. Whitaker. I sat back. The vinyl bench in the safe deposit room creaked under me, too loud in that concrete quiet. He forged his father's name to pay off a card debt. 4 times, it looks like. Marguerite turned another page. This one's worse. I didn't ask worse how. I just waited, the way I'd learned to wait at Floyd's bedside, when the machines changed their rhythm and you didn't want to be the one who flinched first. She read the second summary silently first, her mouth moving, no sound, before she gave it to me straight.
Edwin.
Client identifies discrepancies in Whitaker Glass and Construction investor ledgers totaling approximately $340,000, redirected from the Kessler retaining wall account and the Bonneau residence contract into an entity called EW Holdings LLC, registered to Edwin's home address. His own company, I said, stealing from his own father's clients, and backdating the ledgers to cover it. Marguerite tapped a photograph clipped to the page, a laptop screen, photographed at an angle, showing 2 spreadsheets side by side, one dated correctly, one altered. Someone took this from over his shoulder. Prentice doesn't do things by half. I thought of Edwin at the funeral, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I thought of Sydney's hand on my shoulder in the receiving line, warm and solid, saying Floyd would be proud of how you're holding up, Colleen. I set both thoughts down carefully, the way you set down something that might still be hot. The last page in that section was a single sheet, no photographs, just typed lines under a date 8 months before Floyd died. Client retained Prentice Investigations on advice of personal physician following diagnosis, citing concern regarding financial conduct of both sons prior to making end-of-life arrangements. He hired them after his diagnosis, I said. Not before. He wasn't looking for a reason to cut them out. He already had cancer. He was trying to protect something before he ran out of time. Marguerite closed the folder halfway, keeping one finger inside it like a bookmark. Colleen, did Floyd ever cry in front of you? In the last year?
No.
I said it and heard how strange it sounded, coming out of my own mouth, because for 22 years I would have said the same about every year before that one too. She didn't answer. She looked past me, toward the door of the little viewing room, where Rosa was standing with her purse strapped still over her shoulder, like she hadn't decided whether she was allowed to come in.
Rosa, come sit?
Rosa came in slow, the way she moved through Floyd's house those last months, like the floors themselves needed permission. She looked at the folder, not at me. You found it then? We found what he knew, I said. I didn't know he knew this much. Rosa sat on the edge of the bench, hands folded so tight the knuckles went pale. There was one night, February, I think, maybe a little after. I brought his tea in, and the office door was closed, which he never did, not with me. I could hear him through it. She stopped. Marguerite didn't push her. Neither did I. He wasn't yelling. That's the thing. He was just crying quiet, like he didn't want the house to hear it either. I stood there, and I didn't knock. I've thought about that 100 times since. Whether I should have knocked. What would you have said? I asked her, if you had. Rosa finally looked at me. I don't know. But he came out 20 minutes later like nothing happened, and he asked me to bring the good scotch to his lawyer's office the next morning. Not Halloran. Someone else. I never asked who. Marguerite's pen was already moving on her legal pad, drawing a line between two names I couldn't read upside down. The mortgages, she said, half to herself. Both properties, refinanced past market value, within 18 months. If he pulled equity out of both Delford Lane and the Hartwell house, and it isn't in any account we've been shown, then it's somewhere only I can reach it, I said. The second key, the one still sitting in its little envelope on the table between us, never turned in a lock. He didn't just protect the truth. He moved the money. He let them think they were inheriting a fortune and left them a house made of debt instead. Nobody said anything for a moment. The vent hummed overhead. Rosa reached into her purse and took out a small manila envelope, worn soft at the corners like she'd carried it for a while deciding whether to hand it over. He gave me 2 things that day in January, she said. The letter I already gave you. And this. He said if you ever got this far, if you found the key and the box and read what's in that folder, then you were ready for the rest of it. She set the envelope on the table beside the second key. A small black memory card slid halfway out of it. He recorded himself, Colleen. I never listened to it. He told me not to. I picked it up. My hands did not shake, which surprised me more than anything else that day. Rosa reached into her purse a second time, and my breath caught before she'd even said a word. There's another one, she said. He gave me 2 cards that week, not one. I mixed them up so long I almost forgot the second existed. She held it out, plain and black, no label. This is the one he made himself. Just his voice. He said if you ever heard it, it meant they'd already handed you the fake. I took it from her palm. Marguerite went very still beside me. I pressed it into the little reader clipped to her phone before either of us could think better of it. A crackle of static, then a breath, then Floyd's voice filled the small concrete room, rough the way it got in his last months. If you're hearing this, Colleen, he said, it means they've given you the false one. The tape kept running for another few seconds of empty static before Marguerite reached over and clicked it off. Neither of us spoke. The recorder sat between us on the folding table in the Coastal Trust vault room, small and gray, and suddenly the most important object I had ever touched. Well, Marguerite said finally, that settles what we suspected. It settles more than that. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It's proof, Marguerite. His actual voice. She was already shaking her head before I finished the sentence. It's evidence. It is not, by itself, proof that will move a judge today. She gathered the folder, the bank statement, the second key, sliding each into a manila envelope with the efficient, unhurried motion of someone who had done this 1,000 times for other people's disasters and never once for her own. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without falling apart on me, because I don't have time to put you back together before Friday. I'm not going to fall apart. Good. She set the envelope down and looked at me the way she used to look at Floyd across a negotiating table, back when the two of them handled zoning disputes together. Direct, unblinking, no patience for comfort. Halloran filed that will for probate 2 days after the funeral, before you'd even seen the inside of this box. I heard the words. It took a moment for them to arrange themselves into meaning. Filed it where? Probate court, which means as of right now, in the eyes of the law, that document is the will. Sydney and Edwin's document. It is winning, Colleen, while we're standing in a bank vault holding the real one. The room felt smaller. Somewhere above us a pipe knocked twice against the ceiling, the sound sharp in the quiet. Then we file this one. Today. We can't just file it. Marguerite's patience frayed at the edges, not at me, I understood, but at the whole ugly shape of it. A later will only overturns an earlier one if a court believes it's genuine. And a will handled by a dying man in his own house, with no lawyer of record present at signing, notarized by someone I've never heard of, that gets challenged. Hard. Halloran will challenge it. He drew up the first one. His name is on it. If this new will wins, that makes his work look fraudulent, or worse. It is fraudulent. I kept my voice level. Level felt like the only tool I had left. You saw the signature on the first one. You said yourself it looked wrong. I said it looked wrong. That's not the same as a forensic document examiner testifying under oath that it is wrong. We need a handwriting expert to compare samples, his real signature from a decade of company documents against that shaking version Halloran read out loud. That takes weeks, not days. And the moment we file anything, the moment we so much as whisper the word forgery in a courtroom, she stopped and folded her hands together, and for the first time all afternoon, 60 years of composure slipped a little. Sydney and Edwin will know we're onto them. They will move money. Fast. Edwin especially. If he suspects an investigation is coming, he has had 8 months to prepare a very good excuse for $340,000, and every hour we wait, he perfects it. I thought of Edwin's face at the reading, pale and precise, agreeing with everything Sydney said like a man checking items off a list. I thought about how quickly he'd want those investor books gone. So what do? We wait. We get the handwriting analysis started quietly, we protect this box, and you keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Marguerite locked the envelope inside her briefcase. You keep looking like a woman who has already lost. I didn't answer right away, because the plan she was describing meant walking back into that house tonight and pretending, for who knew how many more days, that I believed I owned nothing. Delford Lane was dark except for the porch light when I got home, the stained glass panels still leaning against the hallway wall where I'd left it that morning, wrapped in an old quilt, waiting for a truck that hadn't come yet. I was reaching for the light switch when I heard a car door. Bianca stood on the front step in a cream coat too warm for the evening, holding a casserole dish like a prop she'd forgotten to put in the oven first. I brought you something. Her smile arrived a half-second after her eyes had already swept past me into the hall. I know how these weeks get. Nobody eats. That's kind of you. I didn't move aside yet. It's late for a visit. Edwin's working. I got restless. She stepped past me anyway, the way she'd always moved through this house, as though she'd been born owning half of it. Her gaze snagged on the quilted shape against the wall. Is that the glass? From the study. It is. You're keeping busy. She set the dish on the hall table without being asked. Have you thought more about Friday? Sydney mentioned Halloran hasn't heard back from you about the papers. Something behind her eyes was working, sifting, the way it had at the reading when she'd looked at the number on my insurance check like she was pricing a used car. I made myself sound tired instead of careful. I'll sign it Friday. The lie came out smoother than I expected, almost gentle. There isn't much point fighting a fight I can't win. Relief moved across her face, quick and unguarded, and I filed it away the way Floyd's detective must have filed 100 small tells just like it. Good, she said. That's smart, Colleen. Really? She turned back toward the door, then stopped, her eyes drifting once more to the quilt-wrapped panel glowing faintly under the porch light where a fold had slipped. "Are you planning on taking that with you?" Her voice went sweet, the way honey goes sweet right before it turns. "Let me have Sydney check whether it actually belongs to the estate." Bianca did not call back that afternoon. She called back 3 days later, and she did not use the number I knew. The screen said unknown caller. I almost let it ring through to nothing. I answered because Rosa always told me the ones who hide their number are the ones with something to lose. "It's me." Bianca's voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, no honey in it at all. "Don't hang up." I wasn't going to. "I need to see you. Not at the house. Not anywhere Edwin would think to look." I stood at my kitchen window, watching a gull work at something on the seawall, and did not answer right away. 3 days earlier this woman had called me to help with a marriage license. Now she wanted a place Edwin wouldn't think to look. "There's a diner on Route 9, I said.
Dots.
"Tomorrow, 11. He'll be at the office." "I know," I said. "That's why 11. She hung up without saying goodbye, which told me more than the call did. Dots smelled like scorched coffee and bacon grease, the kind of place with vinyl booths cracked at the seams and a bell over the door that Bianca made jump too hard when she came in. She'd left the diamonds home. She was wearing a plain gray coat I didn't recognize, and she slid into the booth across from me like she wanted the table between us as much as I did. "I went looking at the mortgage documents," she said, before I'd even ordered. "The real ones, not what Edwin shows me."
"How?"
"I used to be a broker, Colleen. I know how to pull a title history." She wrapped both hands around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. "Both houses are leveraged past what they're worth. The lake house alone is upside down by 900,000. I thought I married into money." Her hands were not steady. I noticed that before I noticed anything she said, the way I'd learned to notice Floyd's tremor before I understood what it meant. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Edwin has an account in the Caymans I wasn't supposed to find. 14 months of transfers. Small enough not to trip anything, big enough that it isn't nothing." She finally looked at me straight on. "He's planning to leave. Not me, the country. If this falls apart, he wants to be somewhere it can't follow him." I let that sit on the table between us like a plate nobody had touched. "And you want a cut. Whatever you're sitting on, and I know you're sitting on something, Colleen. Nobody tears apart a stained glass window in front of Rosa Alvarez for no reason. I want him before he empties that account. I'll tell you everything I find. Bank names, dates, all of it." I studied her the way I studied a cracked pane before I decided whether it could be saved or needed replacing whole. 29 years old, a coat that wasn't hers, a husband circling a drain he hadn't told her about. She wasn't loyal to me. She wasn't loyal to Edwin either, not anymore. She was loyal to whoever was still solvent by Friday. "I'll think about it," I said, which was a lie, and she knew it was a lie, and neither of us said so. But I used what she gave me. That night I called Marguerite and read her the account details off a napkin, and Marguerite went quiet in the specific way she went quiet when something mattered. "That's not nothing," she said. "That's flight risk. Colleen, we can't wait on this the way we planned." She'd already sent Floyd's signature, pulled from 30 years of church contracts, town permits, his and hers wills, to a forensic examiner in Sacramento along with the signature on Halloran's document. The results came back 2 mornings later, a phone call at 7:40 that I took standing barefoot on my kitchen tile. "It's not a match," Marguerite said. "Pressure points are wrong. The tremor pattern doesn't align with his actual condition timeline. Colleen, a court examiner will say this signature was traced or guided. That document is fraudulent, and I can prove it." I sat down hard on a kitchen chair I didn't remember pulling out. "So we file." "We do better than file," Marguerite said. "Filing takes months and lets them lawyer up and delay. You want this over in a room they can't walk out of. I'm scheduling the formal notarization of the real will, the one from the box. Family present. Halloran invited, so he has to watch his own document get dismantled. Sydney, Edwin, Bianca, all of it, all at once." When? Thursday. 10 days from now. I thought of Sydney's texts, always half-friendly, always circling, and I thought of Edwin's account in the Caymans ticking upward one small transfer at a time, and I understood that 10 days was both an eternity and no time at all. The message came the night before at 9:52. I was standing in the studio, running my thumb along the edge of a piece of cobalt glass, when the phone buzzed against the workbench. Bring the property papers tomorrow. Don't make this hard, Aunt Colleen. I looked at it for a long moment, at the word Aunt sitting there trying to sound fond and landing instead like a hand on the back of my neck. I typed one word back. Okay. The notary's office on Route 9 smelled like fresh coffee and printer toner. 9 chairs, and every one of them filled. I set my leather folder on the table before I sat down. Marguerite sat to my left. Across the table, Sydney had already loosened his tie, grinning at his Uncle Dennis like this was a graduation. Edwin sat straighter, hands folded, trying to look like a man who deserved what was coming to him. Bianca sat one seat back from Edwin, not next to him. I noticed that. I filed it away. Colleen. Sydney knocked twice on the table, the way Floyd used to when he wanted quiet. Glad you came to your senses. I did, I said. Eventually. The notary, a thin woman named Patrice, cleared her throat and asked if everyone was ready to begin. Halloran wasn't there. That detail mattered more than anyone in the room understood yet. I opened the folder. Not the waiver. The other document, the one with the raised gold seal from 11 months ago. Before we sign anything, I said, I'd like the record to reflect that there are 2 wills. The room went still enough that I heard the air conditioning cycle on. There is no second will, Sydney said, but his voice climbed half a step on the last word. I slid the notarized copy across the table. Marguerite slid a second folder beside it. The handwriting analysis from Casson Forensic Document Examiners, 3 pages, a signature comparison chart with red circles around the letters that didn't match. Floyd's actual will, Marguerite said, executed 11 months ago at his direction, superseding the one Halloran read you. The signature on Halloran's copy has been examined by a certified document examiner and found to be a forgery. We can walk through the loop closures and pen pressure differentials if anyone would like, but I suspect you'd rather I didn't. Edwin didn't move. His face went the color of the folder. This is insane, Bianca said, but she said it to the room, not to me, and it came out thin. I'm not contesting the estate, I said. My voice stayed even. I had practiced this in the car, in the mirror, in the shower, until it stopped shaking. I'm exercising it. Floyd gave me sole discretion over how the property is distributed. So, I'm distributing it. I opened a second folder. Deed transfers, already drawn up by Marguerite's office, ready for signature. Sydney. Edwin. You wanted the house on Delford Lane, and the lake house at Hartwell. You can have them. Sydney's grin came back, uncertain but hopeful, like a man watching a door reopen. Finally. Both properties, I continued, currently carry combined mortgages of just over $600,000, taken out against them in the 18 months before Floyd died. The equity you think you're inheriting doesn't exist. What exists is the debt. The grin didn't leave Sydney's face right away. It just stopped meaning anything. That's not, Edwin started. And the company, I said, is insolvent. I've seen the books. Client investment funds are missing in an amount close to $340,000, routed through an entity called EW Holdings. I let that sit for one breath. The $47,000 left in it now won't cover payroll past September. Nobody in that room but Edwin knew what EW Holdings was. I watched him learn that I did too. Uncle Dennis looked between the 3 of us like he'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Colleen, what exactly is going on here? Floyd knew, I said, not to Dennis. To Sydney. To Edwin. 8 months before he died, he hired a private investigator. Case file 4471. It has her name on it, Sydney, for loans, a forged signature, $22,000 owed to men who don't send polite reminders when you're late. I turned my eyes to Edwin. And yours. $340,000 of other people's retirement money moved through your holding company while you told clients it was sitting safe in a growth fund. You don't know what you're talking about, Sydney said, but he'd gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a person either runs or breaks. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. I read it at 2 in the morning at my kitchen table for 3 nights straight. I know the dates. I know the casino floor in Reno. I know the wire transfers Edwin dressed up as consulting fees. Bianca had gone rigid in her chair, staring at her husband like she was seeing the outline of a stranger. The real money, I said, the 4.7 million Floyd actually built this family on, it's not in the company. It's not in either house. It's in an account only I can access, and it has been since before he died. Sydney's chair scraped back so hard it caught on the carpet. You planned this. You've been sitting on this for weeks. I have, I said. So, you'd sign willingly instead of being dragged. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out the full Prentice file, photographs, bank statements, the marker slips from Reno paper clipped in a fan, and pushed it across the table until it stopped between Sydney and Edwin. Sign for this inheritance, I said, or I let the prosecutor read the rest. Your choice, both of you. Nobody in the room said a word. Behind me, Patrice the notary quietly capped and uncapped her pen, waiting for someone to reach for it. Sydney reached for the pen first. His hand hovered an inch above the folder, fingers not quite steady. This is extortion, he said.
No, I said.
Extortion would be me asking for something that isn't already yours. Your names are on those deeds. I'm just handing you what you signed up for 3 days after your father's funeral. Edwin hadn't moved from his chair. He was staring at the Prentice file the way a man stares at a test result he already suspects. 340,000, he said, mostly to himself. You knew the exact number. Your father did. I just read it. Bianca stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed over her chest, and I watched something happen to her face, the calculation behind it visibly failing. She'd come here expecting a windfall. She was leaving with nothing, because whatever she'd traded me at, she'd traded it against a husband who was about to become a stranger to her in every way that mattered. Patrice the notary cleared her throat. I need signatures on pages 4, 7, and 11. Sydney signed first. His signature came out jagged, nothing like the smooth, confident script Halloran had once forged. Edwin signed after him, slower, each page like it cost him something physical. When he set the pen down, his hand was shaking. You said no criminal referral, Edwin said. If we sign. I said if you sign, and if you make the investor clients whole, and if you cooperate with the audit Marguerite's firm is going to run on EW Holdings for the next 18 months. Break any part of that, and Prentice's file goes to the district attorney's office in Suffolk County. It's not going anywhere. It's just waiting. Nobody answered. Sydney looked at Edwin. Edwin looked at the folder. Bianca looked at nothing at all, her jaw working like she was chewing on words she'd already decided not to say. The company folded within 4 months. Sydney, it turned out, owed the loan shark from the casino more than the original 11,000. The interest had compounded into something closer to 22, and once the house money was gone, the house itself went with it, foreclosed under the mortgage Floyd had quietly maxed a year before he died. Sydney filed for bankruptcy in November. I heard about the gambling program from Rosa, who still heard things, a 6-week residential treatment outside Worcester, paid for, Rosa said, by Sydney's own savings, the first bill he'd paid with money that was actually his. Edwin's unraveling was slower and uglier. 2 of the investor clients filed civil suits before Thanksgiving, and by the following spring a third joined, dragging his name through a business page nobody in Delford had ever bothered to read before. Bianca left in January. She didn't wait for the lawsuits to resolve. She left the week Edwin told her he'd have to sell her car. I don't know if she went somewhere better. I know she called Marguerite's office once, asking whether there was still a way to claim anything through me, and Marguerite told her, not unkindly, that the answer had always been no. Edwin moved into his mother's old condo in Brockton and started working the overnight desk at a Hampton in off Route 24. Rosa told me this too, the way she told me most things now, sitting at my kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, no longer employed by anyone but still, somehow, employed by loyalty. I'm keeping you on, I told her the week after the closing. Not at the house. Here, wherever here ends up being. Same pay. Better hours. She set her cup down carefully, like it had gotten heavier. You don't owe me that, Colleen. I'm not doing it because I owe you. I'm doing it because for 6 months, you were the only person in that house who told me the truth without being asked. She cried at that, which surprised me, because Rosa didn't cry over money. Sydney called in March. I let it ring twice before I picked up. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said. His voice had the practiced softness of a man reciting something he'd rehearsed in a mirror. For which part? He didn't have an answer ready for that. I let the silence sit there until he filled it with something closer to real. For all of it. For what Bianca said. For not being there when he was dying. I believe you're sorry you got caught, I said. I don't know yet if you're sorry for what you did. Those aren't the same thing, Sydney, and I've had a lot of practice telling them apart this year. How do I show you it's the second one? Finish the program. Pay the clients back, every dollar, even the ones the lawsuit doesn't force you to. Do it for a year without asking me to notice. Then call me again. He didn't argue. He said okay, and hung up, and I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time, not sure whether I'd just closed a door or left one open a crack, and deciding I didn't need to know it yet. The house on Delford Lane sold in April, the last box of Floyd's office packed and gone by the end of the month. I did the final sweep myself, the way I'd done every room in that house for 22 years, checking for what got left behind. In the empty window frame where the stained glass had hung, I ran my thumb along the lead came one more time, out of habit more than purpose. That was when I found it, a line scratched into the wood backing, faint, almost invisible unless the light hit it sideways, in Floyd's unmistakable hand. The light always finds its way out, and you are my light. I ran my thumb over the letters twice before I let myself cry, and even then it was only for a minute, standing alone in a house that was no longer mine to grieve in. Carmel smelled different than Delford Lane. Salt instead of cut grass, gulls instead of traffic. The cottage I bought was small, 1 bedroom, a converted sun porch that would become my studio, and a kitchen window that looked straight out at the water. I signed the papers on a Tuesday in October, 6 months after the notary office, and I did not once look back at the drive. Rosa helped me pack the crate myself. We wrapped the stained glass in 3 layers of moving blankets, and she rode the whole way down the coast with it in her lap, like it was a sleeping child. You're going to hang it in the kitchen, she said, not a question. I'm going to hang it where the morning comes in. I found the spot 2 days after we arrived, a west-facing window in the sun porch, wide enough, high enough that the light would climb it slow through the afternoon instead of burning through all at once. I set the lead came against the frame, marked the mounting points with a pencil, and Rosa held the ladder while I drove the screws myself. My hands didn't shake anymore. That had taken longer to notice than I expected. One morning in December I was threading copper foil, and realized the tremor Bianca used to comment on, the one from those first weeks, was simply gone. The foundation paperwork came together faster than the glasswork. Marguerite drew up the nonprofit filing in November, and I named it before I'd even chosen a font for the letterhead. Floyd Whitaker Foundation. Legal aid for people whose families had turned money into a leash. I seeded it with $2.1 million of the $4.7 million, kept enough for the cottage, the studio equipment, a modest cushion, and put the rest into a fund Marguerite would oversee with me until I trained someone to take my place. You could keep all of it, Marguerite said, the day we filed. Nobody would blame you. I don't want to be rich, I said. I want to be useful. She didn't argue. She just initialed the last page and slid it across the table, the same way I'd once slid a folder across another table to 2 men who thought they'd already won. The first light through the glass hit the studio floor on a Sunday in January, for months after we hung it. I was cleaning brushes at the workbench when I noticed the color pooling near my feet. Amber, then a deep cathedral blue, then a thread of gold where Floyd had asked for 1 clear pane in the corner, so you can always see the actual sky, Colleen, not just my version of it. I stood in it a long moment. Rosa found me there and said nothing, just put the kettle on. Cracked the same way it always did, Rosa said finally. nodding at a hairline seam near the border where I'd repaired an old break years ago, back at Delford Lane, in another kitchen, another life. You'd think a fracture like that would let the dark in. It lets the light out instead, I said. It always did. I just used to stand on the wrong side of it to notice. The letter from Edwin came in February, forwarded through Marguerite's office because he didn't have my new address and I hadn't given it to him. Handwritten, short, a hotel logo embossed at the top. He was night manager now at a Best Western off Route 68, he wrote, and he was sorry, and he understood if I never wrote back. He didn't ask for money. That was the only reason I read it twice. I set it on the workbench next to a half-finished panel of cobalt glass and did not answer it that week, or the next. Some doors you leave unlocked without opening them. Whether I ever will is a question I'm still letting sit, the way Floyd let his own answers sit for 8 months before he acted on them. What I learned, in the end, wasn't really about money, though the money mattered. It was that loyalty without a floor under it isn't love. It's just erosion, dressed up as devotion. Floyd had lived long enough to understand that, and he built me a floor out of solder and secrecy, and one very small key. I don't regret the 22 years I spent making myself smaller for a family that only noticed me when they needed something from me. I only regret how long it took me to believe I was allowed to stop. The light still comes through that window every clear afternoon, exactly where he knew I'd stand to watch it. I don't need it to say anything else to me now. I already know what it's been telling me since the first pain I ever let it as a girl, since the last one Floyd asked me to fix before he died. Light always finds its way out, through the smallest crack if you let it. You cannot keep giving your own warmth away to people determined to leave you in the cold, and call that love. Eventually, you have to let the fire be your own, and let it light the room you're actually standing in.